Buying a business with no money down can be done, but the reality is it will likely cost you more than what you're probably bargaining for. Hi, I'm Jared Kraus. I'm the host of the Buying Online Businesses podcast, and today I'm speaking with Bakari, who founded Graves Hall Capital to acquire companies. In 2023, he acquired a $35 million burlap bag manufacturing company with Granite Creek Partners LLC and he now sits on the board for that company of directors. And in 2021, he also executed a $25 million educational technology company acquisition with Iron Creek Partners LLC. Now, Bakari previously served as director of corporate development for an engineering software company, head of mergers and acquisitions for an artificial intelligence company, director of a technology focused private equity firm, and in each role, Bakari was responsible for sourcing, evaluating, and executing multi-million dollar business acquisitions. Now, Bakari is also a visiting lecturer at Cornell's Graduate School of Management, where he teaches MBA candidates how to buy businesses, which we talk about in the podcast episode, where he teaches people to buy offline businesses. He also has bought an online business from Flippa. We talk about that acquisition being his first ever acquisition as well. But throughout the podcast episode, we also unravel a lot more of Bakari's story and how he started living in an unstable environment and how he went from no money to teaching people how to buy businesses. And it's quite very inspiring success story. We also talk about how he finds these businesses, and a big portion of the talk was how he financed them, with a stern word of warning for anyone wanting to finance a business, which is really important, which we're going to talk about in the pod. Let's talk about how to buy a business either with management, without management. Of course, these are majority offline businesses, but there's so much we can learn and move into the online acquisition space as well. I also go on my high horse again and talk about why we shouldn't be counting time as an input and comparing ourselves to others and others' successes, and what we should actually be doing to set ourselves up for success on our first acquisition. And then we talk a little bit about our lifestyles. Bakari's traveling at the moment. I'm living in a different country to what I was born in. I've lived in a bunch of different countries, and I share how many countries I've traveled to and what my life has looked like a little bit, and what Bakari's life looks like, and how you can have a similar life from acquiring businesses. And there's so much value in this pod. Before we get started though, this is not the only way I can help you for free from this podcast. We're talking about buying businesses here. If you don't have my due diligence framework, make sure you go to my website, buyingonlinebusinesses.com/free resources, and get my due diligence framework that I and my clients have used. It's helped them buy great businesses and prevented them from buying dud businesses. So don't buy a lemon, get the tool. Let's dive in. Do you have a website you might want to sell either now or in the future? We have a hungry list of cashed up and trained up buyers that want to buy your content website. If you have a site making over $300 per month and want to sell it, head to buyingonlinebusinesses.co/sell your business, or email us at info@buyingonlinebusinesses.com, because we will likely have a buyer. Details are in the description. Bakari, hello, welcome to the podcast. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You said it perfectly.
Awesome. So you've bought businesses before, and you do buy businesses. How did you get started buying businesses, and why? Like, what was even the drive for this?
Sure. So my background is pretty straightforward, or not really straightforward, I should say. It's actually a little bit unique. Let's see. So I'm the founder of Graves Hall Capital, which is a private equity firm I founded to buy companies. So far, completed a few deals. Earlier this year, I purchased a burlap bag manufacturing company in partnership with a private equity firm. The year before that, completed an acquisition of an educational technology company, which I did in partnership with a family office. Um, Separate from that, I teach MBA candidates at Cornell's Business School how to buy companies, and and separate from that, I've been working as either director of corporate development or head of M&A for large technology companies, completing acquisitions on their behalf. And so I've been an acquirer both as a principal and as a corporate acquirer, and also do a lot of the sort of teaching to try to convince folks who might not see this as an option or an available place to pursue, that this is actually an option that's worth considering. And so, um, separate from that, though, how I sort of got into this world was when I was like 24, 25. I was trying to figure out how do you get rich. And that's really like the the beginning
Typical
of like my journey.
24-year-old
Um,
thought process.
yeah, that's really, it was very simple. I was very poor and I was trying not to be poor
Yeah.
anymore. And I was looking into different sort of wealth building strategies. Um, Looked at real estate, looked at stocks and bonds. I looked at just straight entrepreneurship through the starting of a brand new company, and I didn't find anything that was as compelling as an option. And from my perspective, the least amount of like direct risk as acquiring an existing established company with you know years, if not decades, of verifiable revenue and profits. Generally speaking, with a staff that's long and tenured, and a customer base that is loyal to not the just the ownership and the management of the company, but to the products or services that the company provides. And so, um, for me, that was just like the most correct option for and safest and most direct option for wealth building, based on everything I had learned up to that point. And so, started trying to investigate how to actually do this work. And started just sort of watching YouTube videos and reading as many books as I could on the subject. I was 24, 25 back in 2015, and there really wasn't a lot of information about the sort of leverage buyout world, other than like trying to learn how KKR does deals, which was not as directly relevant to me as a individual buyer. And so, uh, ultimately, I came across this man named Tim Bovard who was teaching the subject to MBA candidates, and I started to notice that really it was all concentrated at like two MBA programs, Harvard and Stanford, where they were actually teaching individuals how to buy an existing business. And so, Tim Bovard had just started teaching this course at Columbia Business School. I wasn't a student at Columbia Business School, but I lived in Harlem, which was like right down the street from Columbia Business School. And so I just sort of snuck in the back of the class and started learning how this world works and how to, actually go out and do this. And so, from sitting and sneaking into the back of the class, and learning how to do this, now I've done a decent amount of acquisitions and I've worked in this space, and now I actually teach the same class that I was sort of sneaking into several years ago. And so, yeah, that's sort of like the beginning all the way to where I am today.
Yeah, cool. Congrats.
Mm.
So did you try stocks or anything like that, like, or real estate or anything?
Not
Or
as
was it
a
just straight
wealth
in? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not as a wealth building activity. I would say, um, once I started to make like real significant amounts of money, I started investing my money sort of the standard way that you should, which is, through index funds and make sure that you're applying your 401k. And I'm doing all like if you grab any personal finance book like Ramit Sethi's book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, or any other ones, I'm doing all the things that you're supposed to do now. But at the time, I just felt like I didn't have like a really big enough capital
Mm.
base to actually accelerate. Um, you know, I feel like a lot of wealth building, personal finance things are about how to make sure that when you retire, you have like $1 million or more, to be able to live on during retirement. And while I thought that was admirable, I didn't think that that was the lifestyle that I was hoping to
Mm.
live. I wanted to have access to a large amount of capital, or a large amount of disposable income at a much younger age than waiting until I was like 70 or 60. And so I knew that meant that I had to do something a bit more entrepreneurial. And so of course that it sort of brings you to real estate, because that's sort of like the standard place where a lot of people are like they'll buy a house and flip it and buy a house and flip it. And I wanted to do that, but when I started looking into the knowledge place, because I didn't have any knowledge at the time, a lot of the people who were teaching how to do real estate were very shisty, in my opinion. And it was like sort of a weird, pay me $30,000 and I'll teach you how to flip a house. And if you don't flip a house, even though you paid me my $30,000, I'm not giving you back your $30,000. The reason it didn't work is because of you.
Yeah.
Like you didn't do the
This is the
work, and
same in
so therefore
Australia,
you didn't get
actually.
it,
There's
and da da
so
da.
many people
Hmm.
like teaching the education of real estate. We call it property in
Right.
Australia, and I do invest in property. I love
Hmm.
property. I'm buying another property right now, and you're right. Like, but I guess it's the same with like the make. It's definitely the same with the make money online space. I know for a fact because a lot of people when they have a call with me, or they start to work with us, they're like, oh, okay, this isn't actually a scam. Like this is a real person that actually is accountable and cares about people and gets people results. So I totally get that. Um, and your story, yeah, your story's really cool. Like I'm very stoked for you. Like you should be proud of yourself. Like you should
Thank
be
you.
thrilled with, going from sneaking to the back of a class to teaching it. It's a really cool hero's journey story. What was the first business that you bought? And what yeah, what's yeah.
So, separate from the work that I do as a corporate acquirer, where I've acquired several businesses on behalf of an artificial intelligence company that I was working with, and also most recently where I was director of corporate development for an engineering software business, and did deals for them. My in my personal world, the first really big acquisition I did, and completed, was the acquisition of the educational technology business that I did in partnership with the family office. Um, that one came after like years of like it's always so interesting to me to sort of start my journey from that acquisition, when like for like 4 or 5 years it was just like knocking on the door trying to complete like a really good deal, and getting really close to the edge and watching deals fall apart. Like while I'm happy of the first one I did, I learned a lot more from the ones that failed. like 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 is and in fact, when I ultimately completed the first one, I was actually at a place where I was thinking, you know what, maybe I'm not going to be able to do this. Like maybe maybe I'm just maybe everybody's right. You're supposed to go to Harvard and Stanford, and that's the only way that you're able to, buy a company. Like I was like really at that place, and so when I continued to pursue, I was in this really sort of sad, dark, despair part of my life, but started pushing through it, and it ultimately ended up completing. And then funny enough, just like sort of by the sheer sort of will and what's the right word, I'm trying to think, like providence, right? Within a year, the next one completed, which is the acquisition of the burlap bag manufacturing business. And so yeah, it's like once things started rolling, then things started really rolling, and so now I'm pursuing a new acquisition. I can't talk about that one publicly, but that one looks like it has like a lot of legs on it. It may complete, and keeping the pipeline active, the whole nine on the personal side. And so yeah, like this it's I'm excited that things have started to turn around, but there was a long journey. Like I a lot of I'm always trying to inspire people to do this work, but I also try to temper them with this idea that it's going to be like some like quick thing. Like I started really pursuing this in 2016, and it's took like years before like a full acquisition was able to happen. That said, I had unique sort of like challenges in my personal life. Like I was very, very poor. Like I did not have nearly an amount of money to try to pull this off, as I think. There was not a decent amount of money for the down payment and all those types of things. So I was gonna have to like really do a lot of creative financing ways to pull this off, and ultimately was able to. Um, but I always try to caution people that this is not like a get rich quick thing. Like you're not going to be able to like not be able to, but it's very unlikely that you're going to wake up on January 1 and have a completed acquisition by March 1, right? Like that is like you have to build a pipeline, you have to visit like dozens and dozens and dozens. I mean, in the private equity world, it's not uncommon to look at 1,000 businesses and ultimately make an offer on like maybe 20 of them to close one of them over the course of like an entire year. And so, as an individual going out and buying companies, um, I'm always trying to caution people from thinking about this as like this is year one is going to be completed. More often than not, it's going to take like a full like 18 months from like deciding that you want to get this done to like actually being in the chair and owning the business.
Even that, like, and I'm very glad that you shared that. Is I I agree. A lot of people listen to case studies on our podcast of people that have gone away and bought a business, and people will count time like it's important, and it's not important. And hear me out, guys, and you too, Bakari. If you haven't heard me talk about this, like, it's important if you make it important, but um, the reality is that like you say, oh, it could take you 12 months to 18 months to get an acquisition done. Well, what might and say let's say you take uh, you look at, I don't know, 300 businesses in that time frame, right? In say 18 months. Now, it might take somebody 36 months to look at 300 businesses. And yeah, and the reality is that, like, what might take somebody 18 months might take somebody 2 or 3 years, and we shouldn't be counting time. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others. The reality is the inputs that we need to put in, right? And I know from what I hear from you is like you put a lot of inputs in to be able to get a result. And I take my hat off to you, and I take my hat off to everybody else, all of the students that have done that. And that's what we kind of need to do, is we kind of need to like look past other people's success stories of like, I bought $100 million business and it only took me 3 months to do. The reality is, like, that's how many other businesses had they purchased before that, right? So I'd like to ask you what you may, and we're talking about. I'm suggesting or assuming that we're talking about offline businesses here that you have purchased, and there it's with leverage, right? It's a very different story with the online business game. Not too much leverage on the lower end, under $1 million, like $1 million acquisition, not really using too much leverage. For somebody that is buying their first business with leverage and buying an offline business that might be a large acquisition, I could see how much work goes into that to try and make yourself even an attractive buyer, right? So tell me, like, let's talk about the first acquisition. How much was that if you open sharing it? How much leverage did you use? And then what did you do to become an attractive buyer to get to that success in that first acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, the first step was tying my personal identity to what the seller was looking for. And so, like, if anybody's listening to this podcast, you can go on my website. It's graveshallcap.com and get a sense for like the way that I frame myself in the mind of a person who's looking to sell a company to me. And this remains true, which is that when I'm looking for a company, I'm usually talking to the owner about the option to buy their company and run it full time as CEO, where they get the opportunity to not just exit from the company, but also exit from the leadership and management responsibilities that they've had over the course of, however long that they've owned and run their company. And there are people who are attracted to that option, and a lot of people who are not attracted to that option. Um, there are private equity firms who sometimes will buy a company from an owner, but say to that owner, we are not managers of businesses. We own businesses, but we don't like to manage them. And so as a result, we want you to stay in the management chair, even though we now own the company and have paid you handsomely for the privilege of owning your business. And there are a lot of owners who are very open to that because sometimes they just didn't have capital access. And if they could get capital access, it makes a lot more sense for them to sit in that chair. Alongside a private equity firm. And then there are other owners who are like, listen, I've run this business for 40 years. I am not running this business any longer. I'm looking to leave the chair, and they may not have the option to hand that business off to like their son or daughter who has been raised off of the profits that the business has generated, and now works in like a corporate job as a, I don't know, attorney, a management consultant, a, any one of those jobs that pays 200 to $300,000 a year, and they're living a great life. They may live in New York City or LA or something like that, and the option to come to uh, Lumberton, North Carolina, and run their dad's burlap bag manufacturing company doesn't seem as appealing to them, and so dad can hand that business off to the next generation. And so, and then if they were considering maybe handing that business off to somebody in the management team, the managers may not know how to orchestrate and put together the financing to actually complete an acquisition of the size that the seller needs to feel comfortable actually handing off the company. And so, for all those reasons, there are people who are like me who provide that option. We know how to structure the financing and identify and capture the financing to complete the acquisition, and we also want to sit in the management chair and run those companies full time. And so, um, those types of people are the people who usually when I'm on podcasts I'm speaking to, and also who I'm speaking to when I'm teaching my class at Cornell. It's like these are not just financial managers, but also people who want to run and operate. And so, what happened with the first company was that was the story that seller wanted. He wanted to find an option to exit his the management chair. How it ultimately ended up playing out was once we started to pull the capital together, the seller was like, "Hey, actually, this is great capital and great capital access. Why don't I stay in the management chair and keep running the company now that you pulled together this financing?" And so that's ultimately how it played out. So completed the acquisition, and he remains as CEO of the business today.
Yeah, congratulations. That's awesome. It's one thing to purchase a business and to have the previous owner stay involved and using their team and management versus bringing in your own, already having your own. And there's so many different strategies to those different types of acquisitions, both in online business acquisition, and offline. Not that I have experience in offline acquisitions. A lot of people do talk to me, and I do a little bit of like advising um, without charging because it's not my forte. But
Hmm.
what did you learn? Like, let's talk about let's talk about the financing. How did you finance this one? Because it was your first acquisition. Did you put
Hmm.
any of your own cash into it? Because
Sure.
I'd love to hear.
So yeah, so on the financing, and again, I'll reference my website. So anyone listening to this who wants to understand sort of how these like offline acquisitions happen, when I'm talking with brokers, that's usually the first one of the first two questions that they're asking me. They want to know a little bit about my background and whether or not I'm like a good guy and I'm trustworthy, and that makes sense to actually introduce me to whoever they are representing to sell their company to. But then they'll ask me, so how are you going to pay for this? And on my website, I actually have like a tab. I usually say on the call, I say, "Hey, um, have you been to this website, gravesallcap.com?" They'll be like, "Sure." And they'll go to the website and I'll be say, "You see the section that says how I'm paying for it?" And right there on the website, I break down the entire financial structure. And so ultimately what I'm looking to do when I'm putting together the financing is one, I'm as you mentioned, I'm going to be using some leverage. And so that usually through the SBA program. Like that's usually where I'm going to first for capital access. And so that what that means in practical sense is that I go to the bank and I say, "Hey, can we use the 7A program as a part of completing this acquisition?" Or the bank will say to them, say me, "Listen, we're going to use that 7A program." If anyone here knows the 7A program or doesn't know the 7A program, that's the government guarantee that the SBA gives to small banks that allows them to finance transactions up to about $5 million. And if if you fail at running a company and ultimately default on that loan, the bank can get something like 75%, if not more, of recovery of that money that they loaned to you. And so for them, it makes it very close to like a risk-free loan. And so they oftentimes, if they want to do a loan like this, they're going to go use this program to secure themselves against, while also you're going to have to put up a personal guarantee, so they're secured with your personal guarantee and from the government's guarantee. The second piece of the financing puzzle for me is usually a seller note. And so I'm asking the seller to hold some portion of the purchase price back. Um, and I think that's an accessible option for online businesses as well. I don't think it
Yeah, we
always has
definitely
to
do
be.
that.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't always have to
Well,
be like
we
100%.
use we use SBA, and we do use seller note
Yeah,
or
perfect.
seller financing.
hmm
Um,
And so that's a similar
yeah,
type of leverage that's available to me as somebody who goes after offline businesses as well. This is not to say I don't look at online businesses. In fact, I started my very first ever acquisition that I pursued was an online business. It was I found it on Flippa actually. It was the
all right.
yeah, this was back in 2016 before there was the platform split from there was an M&A portion and Flippa that was just like
Yeah.
this very, very small types things. But yeah, I came across the company on Flippa. It was a subscription box business for like survival gear. So, every month they would send you a box with like knives and
Mhm.
matches and flashlights and all those types of things. The business was making like $2 million in revenue, like I think it was around $400,000 in annual profits, and I was buying the company for something like $900,000. And so I went to the SBA to get the loan, which I got, and then I had to raise the rest of the money from investors to complete the acquisition. And so so I
Cool.
still am actually interested in online businesses, and I don't have any issue pursuing those. And then lastly, there's raising equity capital, and so that's the final piece of the puzzle. For me, how I completed the first acquisition was, the family office represented most of the equity for that transaction, and then we partnered with a large bank to bring in the majority of the leverage on the acquisition. So we ultimately didn't need to use the SBA program because the bank that we went with was large enough that they didn't want to actually use that guarantee as a part of their process, and so that's how we ended up completing that deal.
Cool.
hmm
So tell me about cash in. Did you put any of your own cash in
So
for any of these deals? If so, what percentage?
so I I want to preface what I'm about to say by saying I don't think anybody trying to buy companies should start with this sort of frame of I'm not going to have to put up any money. I think,
I totally agree.
yeah, I
I
think,
totally agree.
right.
It just makes it so much harder to get an acquisition done
That's
without
true.
putting skin in the game.
That's true.
And there's so many people out there that I find, unfortunately, sell that you can buy businesses with no money down.
That's right.
And it can be done.
That's right.
And it's a lot trickier to do, especially when you're starting out and you have no runs on the board, you have
hmm
no experience, you're faking the talk. You haven't yet walked the walk.
That's right.
So I'm thank you for prefacing that, and I wanted to back that
Yeah.
up for you as well.
Yeah, I always like to say that. Like, it's not. This is like I don't think anybody should come into this game thinking, "Let me figure out." In fact, there are like people who sell books and different things that say how to buy a business with zero money down. And anybody who's
Yeah,
like sort of
exactly.
telling you how to do that, what they may not be sharing with you is that you're going to give up something. If it's not going to be money, you're going to give up a lot of time. Right. Because as you just said, it's very complex and very difficult to pull these things off. So in my case, I've been able to complete several transactions without having to put up a significant amount of equity capital. Mostly because at the beginning, I didn't have a lot of equity capital. That means, though, I ended up trading a lot of time and also giving up more equity than I probably wanted to in the beginning. Um, and so these are sort of the trade-offs that you'll end up making. And so you can complete the acquisition, um, but you're gonna have to make there's no free lunches and nobody's giving away anything for free. And so, for me, not only am I putting together all of uh the capital to complete the transaction, which is ultimately how I can get away with not putting up that much equity, but I have to hunt down the business and structure and do the due diligence. And these are all things that ultimately the investors are paying for when I'm bringing the deal all together. And so that's ultimately why they'll look at it and say, hey, you put in skin in the game because you've already done so much work to complete this transaction. What I didn't do was say to a business owner, "Hey, I'm interested in buying your company," and the guy says yes, and then I immediately go run to the other guy and just put those guys together and walk away. Like if I do that, then there's nothing that's gonna happen, right? Like then I'd be lucky to even get like a fee, right? Like and so that's the difference between this work. And so I would say I would caution anybody from thinking, "Hey, let's get this started without putting up any money." You're gonna have to put up something, even if it's not money. But sometimes it's a lot cheaper to just actually put up the money if you have it.
Yeah, and I think you can just get the deal done a lot quicker. It's a lot easier with more of your own cash, and it's nice. It gets the deal across the line a lot easier with the seller, knowing that the buyer has skin in the game, and they're not just trying to, and knowing that they have purchased other businesses before. Especially for your first one, like trying to do that without any of your own skin in the game. As a seller for me, selling my business, and I think that's where people really need to put themselves as a buyer in the shoes of a seller and ask, is this something that they would do if they were selling the business? So you can, sit on both sides and equally see, is that something you would do? Do you think it's fair? Because that's the goal, right? Is to get to somewhere that the seller feels the deal is fair and the buyer feels the deal is fair, and that's when magic happens. That's when you meet in the middle and you make an acquisition actually work. Versus, because I've had people come into the online business space and say, these multiples are no good. I can't believe brokers are having these sorts of terms, and they've got really frustrated and angry and just left. And I thought, hang on a second, like, if you were on the other side, what would you do? And I asked them that question. They're like, oh yeah, cool. I'd probably be similar or a bit harsher. I'm like, well, you know, meet in the middle here, because that's where the market is and that's where the value is, or the valuation of a business, anyways, is where we meet in the middle. So I wanted to ask around, when you purchase a business now, you sort of alluded to it before, but you're not the operations manager, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Am I correct?
right now, I'm actually traveling the world. I'm on a world tour. I'm living in a different country every month. I live, yeah. So since July, I've been in July. I left. So right now this is November. So in July, I was in South Africa. Then in August, I was in Greece. September, I was in Spain. Last month, I was in Turkey. This month, right now, I'm in Mumbai, India. And next month I'll be in Thailand. And so, and the companies I own are still US based. And so the only thing that makes it possible for me to do this is one, really good Wi Fi, and the fact that I have a management team that runs the companies on a full time basis, and that there are really efficient ways of traveling back to the United States when necessary. So, for instance, last week
Yeah.
was our board meeting, and so I flew back to the U.S. For that, and also to teach my class at Cornell. And so so whenever I needed to, I fly back. But for the most part, I'm doing most of the heavy lifting that is necessary for my work with my companies virtually. And so yeah, so that's how I've been able to operate. So that said, when probably on the very next deal that I do, my plan is to come back to the United States and work full time in that
Mhm.
company as CEO. And so we'll see how that plays out. As I mentioned, I'm working on a deal right now. We'll see how it plays. But yeah, that's the goal. And so every time that I'm having a conversation with an owner, that's the frame. It's my goal is to buy the company and run it full time.
Cool, cool. Was this your goal when you first got into buying businesses? I'll tell you. The reason I ask this is because I do a lot of traveling as well. I've lived in 8 different countries. I've been traveling since like for 10 years now and off. I've been to about 48 countries, and I'm obsessed with traveling. So I invite you to come to Bali. If you're coming to Bali, let me know. This is where I'm posted at the moment, for probably for a few years. So, but yeah, was that your intention when you bought these businesses? Because that was what it was for me. Is like, I wanted to travel and surf the world, and it's a pretty cool lifestyle, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was I so regarding Bali, I may be in Bali by March. So my plan is to live in a different country every month for the next couple of months. And so it may be around March that I make it to Bali. I have a general itinerary that I'm following, that hopefully will bring me to Bali by that time. That said, uh, 10 years ago, which is maybe 4 or 5 years before I started trying to buy companies, I knew I wanted to, get an option to live internationally and travel the world. One of my favorite movies is Up in the Air. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie with George Clooney, where he lives this lifestyle where he's like traveling all the time on by plane. And that was for me, that was a movie that was very inspirational. I wanted to live exactly like that life. I thought that was really cool. And so now it's kind of funny. Like I actually really do. Like I'm on a plane. Like it was actually exhausting last week. I was on a plane. I probably flew more times in that week last week than I've ever flown like in my life. Like I was on a plane at least twice a day every day last week. I flew into New York City, then I flew to Ithaca, then I flew to North Carolina, then I flew back to Ithaca, then I flew to Atlanta, and then I flew to India. So it's just like back to back to back to back back and then several like sort of like changing flights too. It was so intense. So I'm enjoying the lifestyle. That said, I think unless you're buying an online business, or which are a lot easier to manage, I think, from a not being stationary in the on site, and sometimes some online businesses do require you to be on site. Um, uh, the offline businesses, like for instance, the manufacturing business and the ed tech business, those things somewhat, unless you're going to have a management team, require you to be on location. So um, the company that I'm looking to buy now, that one will more likely than not require me to be on location. And so unless I plan to hire a management team, and that's it, the business comes with a very strong management team. That's one of the things I'm excited about with the company. But unless I just gonna leave the management team to run the business or hire a CEO to run it, which is what we did for the management company, for the manufacturing company, more likely than not, I'll be on location. And so we'll see how it plays out.
Cool, man. Cool. Yeah. I've got a lot of travel up my sleeve as well. Like I won't be back
Hmm.
in Bali until March anyway, because I'll be snowboarding,
Oh
tennis
wow.
trips, surf trips up until March anyway. So
Very cool.
that's yeah, that's the reason why we do this, right? And
Hmm.
I think it's worth sharing this because I was doing a little I do a Facebook live into my group every like paid community every once a month, and somebody asked me like, why are you moving to Bali? And they ended up talking to me and asking me about like my lifestyle and all that sort of stuff. And I had just not shared much of my lifestyle on purpose for a long period of time because I didn't want to be the guy that was on Instagram, like showing off my life. And then I didn't want to be on the wrong side of that, feeling like I needed to just put out content there and sell my life. Also, I didn't want to have to feel like I was doing things to prove that my life is worthy, or like is inspirational. But I just forgot that like the people after us sharing a little bit about like what my year had looked like or my last 2 years had looked like in terms of traveling, living in different places, surfing around, I just totally disregarded that it was inspirational and totally forgot like people want to hear that and want to see that. So that's why I asked you because it is like you said with that movie, it's pretty inspirational and it's pretty cool life that I feel that you should be proud of because and this is what we're doing here with this podcast is sharing people with people like this. If you want this is the vehicle. And
That's exactly right. I mean, in fact, that's a big part of why I've started, you know, starting to become more active on podcasts. Like I would say up until maybe 5 or 6 months ago, I was uh I was almost invisible on to the net. There were no videos or conversations or anything that I had shared publicly about like how I had gotten things done, the lifestyle that I was living, the whole nine. And just very recently have I decided to start to become more visible and more vocal about it, because I do think that there's probably more people like me who, I think when I was coming to space as somebody who didn't have like a lot to try to get to where I'm at, there really wasn't anybody else like me who had actually navigated a lot of this work and had done it successfully. Like I kept meeting people who had a lot more safety nets than I had, and a lot more. I don't know, just any sort of. There was just they had something that I didn't have. They either had an undergraduate degree, which I didn't have, or they had a business degree, which I didn't have, or they had a family support system that could provide them with some capital, which I didn't have, or they had something as basic as like stable housing, which at the time I didn't have. Like, like there was just like all these different things that I didn't have. So anytime I was like listening to somebody who had like bought a company, I would hear them and I'd be like, I would believe that it could get done. I knew it could get done, but there was always this part of me in the back of my mind that was like, yeah, but they also had this one thing that you don't have, and so therefore, and so when I'm speaking, I'm always like I'm trying to inspire people because I think I came from the absolute like zero place. Like I think the one thing I had
Yeah.
that I think that some people might say that's an advantage is the one thing I had was I had an American citizenship. Like, that was about that's the one thing I had, which I which is
It's
not to say it's
people take for granted.
which is not to say that's not an important thing. And I realize it more and more as being outside the United States and meeting people who have different unique challenges that are sometimes just not a challenges for me because I'm an American. Um, uh,
Mm.
it's interesting to realize how privileged you are as an American, or
Mm.
become, or to confront it even more. As an international person who lives internationally. But that was about it. Like other than that, I had to figure it all out. And so
Yeah.
if you're in my position where you have just a little bit more than just an American citizenship. I do think it's possible for you to get these things done, and I hope to use these podcasts, particularly yours, and some of the stuff I do on social media and stuff to just like inspire people to see that this is accessible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so glad that you came on and shared that story. Like, I think people take for granted that an American citizenship is a win.
Yeah.
Same with Australian citizenship is a
Hmm.
huge win. And, I may have been a little bit more privileged than you being in Australia and having, stable housing. But at the same time, I mean, I bought my first business for $15,000 and I scrapped it together.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what
And
it
I was a
takes.
plumber. I never did the education thing, and there's so many people that I don't know. Not to we should compare ourselves to others, but like there's so many people that started with less than what I did
Hmm.
and have achieved incredible things. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's so inspirational to hear and talk about like where you came from, and then like look at the lifestyle that you live now,
Yeah.
and then inspiring people at the same time. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Bakari.
Thanks for
I'll be
having me.
putting a link to your website in the show notes,
Sure.
and
And if
yeah,
anybody
let's
wants
stay in
to,
touch.
if anybody else who's listening wants to stay in touch, you can reach me via email. It's just my first name at graveshallcap.com. As I mentioned, I'm doing some stuff on social media. You can, that's on nomadnoir.co. If you type in nomadnoir.co to any of the social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, except for Twitter. That's the only one I don't use right now. You can find most of my stuff there. And so yeah, let's stay in touch. I'm excited to do so.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening, and I'll speak to you on the next one.
Looking forward to it. Bye bye.
Hey YouTube watcher, if you thought that video was good, you should check out this video here on the 2 best types of websites beginners should buy. Or check out my playlist on how I made my first 100K from buying websites and how to do due diligence. Check it out. It's an awesome playlist. You'll enjoy it.